And we're going to start with the Office of Juvenile Justice. And so, if you would please introduce yourself. We stated at our last hearing with you guys, which was back in August, that we would have you come back and give us an update. And that is what we are expecting to receive today, in addition to more questions that my colleagues may have. Oh, is he not? Are you on?
Yes, I see. Yes, thank you, Senator Barrow. Curtis Nelson with the Office of Juvenile Justice, Assistant Secretary, and I also have with me Mr. Darren Potan, who will introduce them.
Yes, Darren Potan, Executive Management Advisor.
And so, Senator, Deputy Secretary Summers, he had a family emergency, and so I am here in his place. So,
Okay. So can you provide us with an update and give us, let us know exactly where you guys are? When you were here the last time, we were having some issues with some of the facilities, young folks breaking out, etc. And then the plan, some of the legislation that had passed as it relates to a tiered level. Where are we with many of these items?
So, Senator, what we have done is prepared a presentation, and we've prepared that to you all. That was based upon your questions that were submitted, so we kind of just summarize our responses to those questions. And so where we are, populations-wise, as of November 17th, the majority of the youth that we supervise are on what we call community-based supervision. That's about 2,000 youth that we supervise in the community. In the secure care facilities, we have about 267 youth, and in our non-secure group home settings, we have about 345 youth. There was a letter that we sent out to judges, and that letter made a lot of news, and we didn't really understand why there was such concern about the letter, because we regularly communicate with our judges to let them know we have youth in detention who need to be placed, and we're rotating youth out of our custody so that we can make room. And so that letter really was more just to say, if you get a bunch of motions asking for release of youth, don't be alarmed, but we want to kind of make space for the children who need to be placed in our custody. Right now, statewide, I have about 50 youth who need to be placed. Of that 50, 30 would be placed in a group home setting, and the other 20 plus would be placed in a secure setting. If you look at
Before
Yes,
you go from that page, we have a question from Senator Mizell.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Could you tell me on the population, the breakdown between male and female?
So the males still tend to be the majority of our youth in care. Senator, what I would say is in secure population, that's probably going to be about less than 20% represent females. The majority are males.
And are they primarily all at where? Are they kind of scattered or?
No, ma'am, that's a good question. So yes, ma'am, the majority of the youth female population in our custody, they are at where. So I have 11 girls who are in a secure care facility at where. I have another 6 who are in the residential program. And then I have about 4 to 5 who are off the Ware grounds at the Johnny Gray Jones residential facility, but that is still a facility that is operated by Ware.
Okay, so they're all under the facility at Ware in some form or another.
Yes, ma'am, that's
Okay,
correct.
okay.
That's correct. And we do have, fortunately, the girl population is small, and I'm thankful for that. I do have some girls. I think I have 4 in a group home in New Orleans, and there's one more that may have about 2 to 3. So, but Ware does oversee the majority of our female population.
And I'm going to want to get more into that, but just as you're taking us through your information, I just want to understand before you share it with us. Every facility is under the guidance of juvenile justice, whether it's a privately owned or funded by whatever.
Yes.
But you all are you all set the tone, you all set the standards. Am I right?
So with the providers, we have a contract, and so
Okay.
our oversight is through those contracts, and we monitor those contracts.
Okay.
Versus the facilities that the state own, yes, I have direct oversight
Okay.
with those.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Mizell, Madam Pro Tem. Before we go any further, and I'm going to try to see if I can get this letter to all of you guys, because if the presentation is based upon my letter, then I want to make sure that my colleagues have that information. I did send a letter back to the secretary back in July. And I had 12 questions that I asked them to answer. And so it's my understanding that the 12 questions are being answered in this presentation.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right, Dan. I want to make sure that I give that to my colleagues so that they can follow along as well. So I'm going to get someone to get that information for me. But, okay, thank you. You may proceed.
And if for some reason, Senator Barrow, once we finish, if you feel like we still need to give a little bit more, we definitely want to make sure we answer those questions thoroughly. So the next slide we would have, it's average length of stay. And that was something else that we highlighted in our letter to our juvenile court judges, is that the average length of stay has not had much change. A youth once placed in our custody on average will stay in state's custody for right about 1 year. And so we're monitoring that because we always want to ensure that the young people are only with us as long as they need to be. If you look at the next slide, quarterly admissions. So we have seen an increase on a quarterly basis. So quarterly for the for custody placements, we're right at about 89 for this fourth quarter. On supervision in the field, you would notice that there has been an increase. So for the fourth quarter, we have about 559 youth who have come into the system to fall under our supervision. The next slide, which is the Office of Juvenile Justice Future State. So this shows where all the facilities are placed within our state. And I would like to kind of take a little time with this one. So Columbia, Swanson, that is the fast track program, and that is a tier 2, tier 3 program. And currently we have 48 youth. We are at capacity with the Columbia facility. Acadiana Bunkie, that is a 72-bed facility, and that is, again, a tier 2, tier 3 facility. At Acadiana, we've placed a lot of focus on making sure the young people are receiving what they need for college preparation as well as vocational programming. If you drop down to the red box, Acadiana St. Martinville, that is a tier 1 facility, and we also use the St. Martin facility for our in-processing of youth. So when a child leaves a detention center, we want to have somewhere where we can do some assessments before we actually place them in a secure facility. And so St. Martin is the facility that we're currently using for that purpose. And it can house up to 24 youth. If you go back down to the right, Bridge City. So Bridge City, there were major changes that we made to Bridge City. And as Senator Barrow mentioned, last time we were here, we were addressing issues of escape. So Bridge City was depopulated, and the only youth on that campus are the youth who have been charged and adjudicated for a sex-related offense. And so the program is the JUMP program. That stands for Juvenile Understanding and Managing Problematic Behavior. And so currently we have 24 youth at Bridge City. We could probably house at least 40 youth, but again, that is only for children who have been adjudicated for a sex-related offense. And the goal is to keep it that way. The young people there, their behavior is not typical of wanting to escape or engage in violent behavior. And so we we feel that with the security measures that were put in place statewide, Bridge City is definitely a much safer facility as it stands today. So going back up north, we're going to go to West Feliciana. Now, West Feliciana, yes.
So before you go any further, we have a question from Senator Jackson.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Bridge City, how is that facility? Is it dormitory or is it single room?
It is an open dormitory.
Okay, so you always know my concern with open dormitories, moving from one in Swanson, and not saying that these juveniles will reoffend, but there's been a lot of publicity regarding rape in juvenile facilities. If we're housing all of those sex offenders, that juvenile sex offenders in an open dormitory style facility, how are we protecting them from
Yes,
each
ma'am.
other's for sexual crimes?
That is a good question. And so keep in mind, before we depopulated Bridge City, it was always the sex offender campus.
Well, I understand that, but
Yes, ma'am.
the question has recently arose that, or reports have recently arose that there's a lot of sexual abuse and rape going on in the juvenile facilities.
So I want to distinguish ourselves from where, which I know Senator Mizell, you asked about that. So at Bridge City, we are PREA compliant. So we have sufficient staff that's in the dorms with the youth when they are in the dormitories. So at night when they're sleeping, when they're doing their hygiene, we have the staffing level to work those dorms to ensure that we're in compliance with PREA law.
Okay, so you know what I'm going to ask you then. At Swanson, we're still not fully staffed enough. We're pulling probation officers and everyone else to try to staff those dorms. There was a juvenile to staff ratio that was alarming.
Yes.
My understanding was that was all across Louisiana. In these dormitory style buildings, we had one female in with 8 to 9 youth in dormitory styles. What is it looking like in this facility?
Yes, ma'am. Perfect question, Senator. So what happened when we took the general population youth off that campus, the staff that would work with that population, we were able to just shift them over. And so now for Bridge City, we have sufficient staff numbers to work that campus. And the goal is to keep it around 42, 50.
So how many juveniles are in dorms? Like per dorm, how many juveniles kind of?
So for each dorm, it's up to 12 youth per dorm. And so we have 3 dorms. We're not at capacity.
Right.
Yes, ma'am.
So how many on the night shift in that dorm, and in each dorm, how many adults are there? How many staffers?
I have 2 staffers per dorm at night in the dorm, but I also have at least 4 to 6 more staff who are roving the campus and doing other duties.
And how do juveniles report if there is sexual abuse or rape? How would they go about reporting it?
So we have an administrative relief procedure, and so the youth can file a complaint. They can also, all of these children have attorneys, so they can notify their attorney. I have caseworkers who work on that campus. They can report it to the caseworker. For each one of the dorms, we have clearly up and published, if you have a problem, this is what you would do. These young people, they go to court on a regular basis. And so we feel for our campus, PREA compliance is not really an issue.
Yeah. How many reports have you had, let's say in the last year, on that campus
At the Bridge
regarding
City
sexual
campus?
abuse or rape?
To my knowledge, there was only one incident where it was peer on peer, and that was reported. And so we were able to relocate another youth. And I really believe at this point that youth that we moved off that campus may have been reintegrated back to the community. So,
Okay. So
but I can get you a more accurate response.
and I don't want to divulge the youth name or anything, but did this happen at night? How, if we're properly staffed at night, how did this incident occur?
So for PREA compliance, you don't actually have to have a completion of the act. In that case, I believe it was a youth basically coming on to another youth,
Okay.
and that was the report.
Because that's going to be my concern. I know we're going to Swanson later. I've received a lot of grief about you all going to non-dormitory style single rooms. And I've said to everyone and even parents who are upset, if one of us had a 13-year-old that was being placed in one of these facilities, I just believe you sleep better at night with the single rooms. Because what we've been seeing with physical attacks, sexual attacks across, the juvenile facilities has been alarming. And I know that people think it's more of a prison style, but I think it's more of a protective mechanism for youth, especially those younger youth who found themselves in these facilities. I think it's a lot of protection that they can sleep at night without worrying about what happens. Because I tell people that these children still go to school in the morning.
Yes.
And they're underperforming in those schools.
Yep.
And if you have to stay up all night to watch yourself, sleep lightly, it doesn't affect every aspect of your life in that facility. And so I am, slowly becoming more of an advocate for these single room style facilities for the protection of those younger youth who find themselves, unfortunately in those facilities. So just for a point of clarification, I am, and so I'm going to make the motion today, supportive of Swanson going to, because, a lot of people are complaining, but I don't think they've walked those facilities. I don't think they've had one-on-one with those youth that are out there who's saying, I'm not sleeping at night.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm not sleeping at night. And that was the general concern at Swanson,
Yes, ma'am.
at Bridge City, and and our other facilities. Were the youth able to sleep undisturbed at night? And also, my concern became heavily for our constituents who are employed at those facilities. They were constantly under attack at night in the dorms, during the daytime, whenever. And so for me, I know that it looks more like a prison, but for those who are in there, it feels more like safety in the night hours.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And so that's a perfect segue to talk about the West Feliciana campus, and that is the campus that's on this Angola grounds.
Before you move there,
Yes, ma'am.
we have another question by Senator Mizell.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I was going to hold off, but my Senator Jackson opened the door, and I don't want to get into it at depth, but I want to kind of lay the groundwork that we find out more so we can have a more in-depth conversation about Senator Jackson's concerns were primarily peer on peer. My concerns are staff and juveniles. And the New York Times story just was horrific. And I'd really like to know if you could provide for us the numbers of cases reported, the number of cases prosecuted, and what actions were taken by juvenile justice in response to that, because the numbers and the horror stories of the residents were one thing, but the lack of prosecution were breathtaking.
That's fine.
And I think there's got to be some accountability on that. So I know it's not contained today, but I'd like to, with the chairman's approval, to have a further conversation so that we can have some peace of mind that we've addressed it and it's not an ongoing situation.
I am happy to have that discussion, and so if now's an appropriate time, or if you want us to put something in writing, whatever's the pleasure of this body.
Well, I'd appreciate that. I'd like you to tell me how it's been addressed,
Yes, ma'am.
and then we can move forward
Yes,
with
ma'am.
the numbers. Okay.
Understand. So, Senator, myself, along with Mr. Patan, Deputy Secretary Summers, we went up to where at the direction of the governor. And so before going, we all read the article, and I was horrified by what was contained in that article, and even just some of the responses from the adults working with the children. What I can tell you, and in no way am I minimizing the atrocities that were contained within that article, what we found was the incidents dated from pretty much the opening of that facility all the way up until 2015, I think was maybe one of the last reports. Leadership at Ware is different. The person who was overseeing that facility is no longer the director. He has retired. What I can tell you, Senator Mizell, is that from the point that Deputy Secretary Summers came on board for OJJ, there were some conversations OJJ had with Ware, and as a result of those conversations, several things happened for implementation purposes. But before I even get to that, when it comes to those suicides, this body acted accordingly in passing legislation. So the Solon Law, requiring the detention screening instruments. There was something that happened after the Peterson youth death. And so that is something I felt the article did not highlight, was that as a state, we didn't just sit back silently, we took action. When it comes to those instances of staff on youth inappropriate interaction, one of the things that OJJ did was within, we required that there was prior reporting by Ware. And so I can say that I think it went back to at least 2015, 2014. You now have documented reports from Ware reporting any type of inappropriate sexual activity on that campus. And that's important because you got to have, that's where you get your oversight.
Right.
My counterparts at DCFS, they also went up to Ware when we had our conversation. And so I believe there were definitely some breakdowns in oversight at that facility. But the change in leadership is probably going to be a big factor in not seeing that happen anymore. We did submit our beliefs and recommendations to the governor on our findings. And so one of the things we believe is going to help is training of staff, constant training of staff, bringing on board screening of new hires. So one of the things we found out was that
It was one of their psychological evaluations they did for pre-employment, which is a very good tool. Didn't really look at the risk of sexual abuse. So we made a recommendation for a change to another tool that is recognized as a very powerful indicator, or being able to tell if a potential employee is going to be abusive.
to work at OJJ, Senator Mizell, you have to do a Diana screening, and that is a tool that we use to see if there's any indication of sexual predator behavior.
What does that stand for?
I don't believe it does. I think it's just Diana is
Yeah.
actually the name. Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. And so, unfortunately, Ware does not use that instrument, but as Mr. Patan mentioned, they have incorporated a process for new hires to have some type of psychological examination before being hired.
And I think the really distressing part of it was that it's one thing to hire the person and have them in that environment, but then to know that they were taking actions that were just repulsive in their, especially in their role of protecting the, and there was no punishment. I mean, there was no prosecution. That was really hard for me to believe that we would, because so now I'm wondering where the perpetrators, if they're still in the system.
Well, based upon what we were able to find out, was that you have had at least 4 to 5 staffers who were prosecuted in some format. Now, I know that at least in a few, they were able to plead down, but there were indictments and there was some form of prosecution that went forward. We did not find that any staffer who had actually been found guilty or pled guilty, they no longer work at Ware. So based upon the Ware process,
Were they? My fear is that that they're really not being prevented from being put into another situation where they could keep that behavior going and I just want some peace of mind about that.
No, ma'am, and I think your concerns are valid.
So I think when you look at the Louisiana detention standards, especially at the detention facility they're located at, where there are, if a person is convicted of certain offenses, they are barred from employment at that agency based on licensure requirements. The sexual offense against a minor is going to be one that immediately bars them from employment. And they would not be allowed to work at that facility or any other detention center across the state of Louisiana.
Okay. Yeah, that was definitely going to be my question. But what other actions were taken?
By the WARE leadership? Or?
Yeah, no, well, with those individuals who had offended the young people, what else happened? I mean, other than being barred, what else happened?
So there were staff that were, like I said, convicted. I believe based off the article, there were, I believe at least 3 that were placed on probation. I think you have 1 still pending trial, and another person, a more frequent incident where they are, or a more recent incident, I should say, they are also awaiting trial at this point. Now, whether they are those 2 are still incarcerated, I'm not sure about that.
Go ahead.
How long have they been awaiting trial?
That I don't know. I'm
I don't
sorry.
know. Yeah.
I don't remember exactly because I know there was
And are they working while they're awaiting trial?
Yeah.
not at the facility, no, ma'am. So if they're working at another location, doing at McDonald's or wherever else, I'm not sure.
And keep in mind, senators, that again, this is a contractor that we contract with. The local DA, the local sheriff were all involved in these criminal investigations. What we found was once the youth made that report and the matter was turned over to the local law enforcement officials, that piece worked. Now, the abuse that was happening, that was what I believe was the failure. But once it was reported, it does appear that somebody was made aware, because that was our question to our counterparts. Once you became aware that this child was making a complaint, what did you do? And what we were advised is that when a complaint is made, that staffer is put on suspension. They cannot come onto the campus, and they wait until there's a finalization of the criminal matter.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
So is there anything that's placed in their file going forward where they are prohibited, or there is something that denotes that they were arrested and there were charges filed or whatever to prevent them from working with children in any arena?
So if they're arrested, it goes on their rap sheet, and whenever, as a requirement of employment at a detention facility, you must obtain a criminal background check prior to that person arriving to the facility to start work. So you have to have a cleared background check. As a former manager of a detention center, if we had an individual that had some type of criminal arrest on their rap sheet, we would then send it to licensure for clearance. Licensure would then review it and clear that person for hire at that point.
Okay. Senator Jackson.
I think you took care of it. That was my concern. I understand, but what if they're not convicted? Like, what if they plead to a misdemeanor? Is their license revoked then?
The WARE facility or
The individual who's committed the act.
If it depends on the offense that they plead down to. If it's the statute distinguishes which offenses are barred from working in that type of facility. So it would be dependent upon what that plea agreement was. Because if it was pled down to, say, a simple assault, that is not a barred offense.
Yeah, but see, that's my concern. To me, if you commit any offense that you have to plead to, and maybe we need to change the licensure requirements on that. This is my thought. If you're working anywhere in the state of Louisiana, for the state of Louisiana, whether it's at a juvenile facility or otherwise, and you commit a crime against a juvenile, we probably need to look at those licensure requirements, because you shouldn't be able to re-enter, and you at least, at the very least, should be put on a no hire list. But I look, you know how this is. If sometimes in certain jurisdictions, if you know the right people, you leave the case laying cold for a while. You can plead down to a simple assault, especially if that juvenile who's in that facility doesn't have parents or guardians who are advocating every day that that person shows up at court. My concern is that you are sometimes allowed to plead down to something else, although the crime that you committed fits aggravated battery, sexual assault, and then you're right back in a facility, whether state owned or not, working with juveniles. I think that maybe it's time for us to look at those licensure requirements, because my thing is, if you plead guilty to anything in a juvenile facility, you shouldn't be able to re-enter another juvenile facility, nor should you be able to work in a capacity with juveniles, especially if it's something sexual in nature and you plead down to something just to keep you off the sex offender list.
Right. So what I would say,
and that's that's my, what I mean. That's an issue, and I know that you didn't set those licensure requirements up, but it may be time to review, or even if we keep it that way, maybe a no hire list with the state. Right. So if we don't touch the licensure requirements, we may need to visit some type of no hire list that you go on if you plead down to anything and you've worked with in the juvenile facility for the state.
So, and that's what I wanted to really distinguish, though, OJJ run facility versus Ware, which is private. Now, for our facilities, our policies, our protocols would prohibit that person from being rehired within our facility, because we have very strict policy on an inappropriate relationship with a youth. That's a violation of our policies. And so that staffer would be disciplined and would likely be terminated. And when I say likely, because what has happened is, when we have had those kind of incidents on our facilities, that is the process, that the staffer is suspended. We do the termination, and that's based upon our policies. We don't have to wait for an adjudication or a conviction. Our policies say that if a staffer has an inappropriate relationship with a youth, then that is an automatic grounds for termination. So for your state facility, you do have that structure in place.
Right. And so do we have a contract with Ware?
We do. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So in our contract, couldn't we put the guidelines they follow, like the Diana
screening?
Yeah,
Yes, ma'am.
screening.
Yes.
If we know it works for the state, and if we know we have it in place, and when we're contracting out, these are still our youth. Mm-hmm. These are still people that are under our jurisdiction that we need to protect. Couldn't we put in their contract that they follow these procedures in order to have a contract with us?
I don't see any reason why we couldn't.
So that's going to be my strong suggestion. I know that these issues with Ware just came about, but anyone we contract with to take care of our youth, the procedures that you follow, if it's good enough for us, if we found it to be protective mechanisms, also could we require them to put a no hire policy in, meaning they check with the state facilities and see if that person is on the no hire list. They have a no hire list that they submit to the state as well, because we don't want people coming over from Ware to our facilities as well. My thought is that anyone we contract with should be under the same requirements. So I just think, number one, no hire lists in our facilities as well as facilities we contract with, and that if any of the facilities like Ware that we contract with are going to be housing our youth, that they be under the same screening requirements and protective requirements that we are. You don't enter into a contract with us, because I don't feel comfortable having a standard of care for the youth that are in our facilities and then having a different standard of care for the youth for the facilities we contract with. If we're protecting children, we need to protect them at the same level wherever they are, and we need to be able to track that protection.
I don't disagree.
And I know that both of you share the same heart, but I think that remedies the issues with is Ware doing something different. Are youth fully protected at Ware? What does that look like? What it should look like, if we're contracting with you, it should look like the same thing we do. And we know that we're not saying we're perfect. We're still working on it. But as this committee and other committees and the legislature passes bills, and I think it'll be incumbent upon us members that when we pass bills regarding our state facilities, we start adding in or any facility contracted with OJJ, because that clears it up, that it doesn't have to be put in every contract. And maybe, Madam Chairperson, that would be my suggestion for the committee, staff to do an overview of all the requirements we have in place for OJJ facilities and go back into that statute, kind of like we did, Hewitt, with the cleanup we did last year on another subject matter, and clean that up to say, and any facility that OJJ contracts with, because then we don't have to worry about, and not saying you won't do it, but I just don't want anything to slip through the cracks, especially when it concerns children. So your contract should include it, but I believe our law should also extend whatever requirements we put on you as far as, protection, screenings. Because when we get down to mental health screenings, a lot of what's happening is based on the mental health of those juveniles who are in these facilities, and things that have gone untreated, right? And so I believe that mental health screenings, as we've talked before, is going to play a huge role in that. I know you've made some tweaks to how, when a juvenile enters your facilities, am I correct, that they have proper mental health screening? We want to make sure that even in mental health screenings, if they enter a facility we're contracted with, then they have that extensive mental health screening. Because a lot of what we're seeing with attacks on guards, with attacks on other youth, are just untreated mental health conditions and emotional conditions that spill over. Someone raped me, so I was violated, and so I'm going to violate someone else, right?
Yes.
We have to recognize that these are youth, and as heinous as the crimes are, we have to recognize that there is, they're not fully developed mentally. That's just a fact. Scientifically, it's been studied. And we have to put more barriers in place. But we also, because we know at some point they're coming out of the youth facilities as adults, okay? This is the issue. If we have them for 5 years and we don't address their emotional and mental health needs, then we failed them and society. Because now what we have is an adult rapist on our hands, or an adult person who believes that violence is the answer. I just really think as we go forward, we need to look at mental health screenings on a larger, and I know you're doing that in your intake, but we need to know what that result. And so that's my next request, is that if you're not going to present that today, that next time you're before us, we need to know what mental health screening someone's going to, and after that juvenile goes through that mental health screening, how do we address any mental health or emotional issues that are found? Because that, to me, is the most serious thing. You have to change a person's mindset to change their actions and their heart, right? And so if someone has been abused themselves, sometimes they're more likely to become an abuser. How do we stop that cycle? If someone has been sexually abused, they're more likely to act out in that area. And I know your heart. I know the department's heart. I understand that, but we need to get to the crust of it. Some of the money that's coming down federally before we come into session and allocate it, to companies. How do we allocate, if possible, some of the money that the federal government has passed for mental health treatment in schools and other places to you all? What would that look like? I really would like to see a comprehensive plan of not only mental health screening, but also mental health and emotional health treatment for these youth. And I'm going to end with this. The reason why I feel like it's so important, there was a 11-year-old in a facility who acted out, who said, at the age of 6, I was made to smoke marijuana. At the age of 8 or 9, I was made to commit my first crime. And this is the life that we live.
Yeah.
If we know this and we're hearing these stories, we have to address it at some point. Lastly, and Madam Chairperson, I hope not, because I know I'm long-winded, but it's passionate about the kids. What does it look like for placement afterwards? How do we examine them throughout the mental health and emotional treatment to determine whether or not, if they're coming out at their 15th birthday or their 16th birthday, whether we need to return them to the home they came from? Because I think, and I know that's a lot to put on you, and I know some of it requires financial support, but how do we, determine whether or not the home we're returning them to is fit, or we're returning them to only return to us or to an adult facility? I think that, I know that's your heart and those are the questions that need to be answered, but I really would like to see a plan, because the return home plan for me, and when I talk to these juveniles when they're on their second round at, our facilities, has become questionable. We're returning some of them to the same environment they left. And I'm not saying that it was a bad environment. I know some parents who worked really hard and their kids just decided to get with someone at school and become the person that the parent did not push. But I also know some kids that are being returned to environments that are forcing them to commit these crimes. And that's the thing. If we're returning them to those environments, we're going to see them again, most likely in adult facilities, when we no longer can help them. So those are, I know I said a lot. I'm sure you guys took notes.
Got it all.
Those are the things I'm looking to see. So I had to return home plan to that and what it looks like. And whether or not judges can keep some criteria in those return home plans when they're on probation. I know we can. What does that criteria need to be? How do we hold the parent and the child accountable on the return home? You return a child home to a place where they have nothing to eat.
Right.
We need to know what that home looks like.
So, Senator, what we will definitely provide to this body is there is a whole reintegration process, and within the and that's statutory. Those are the things that are supposed to be addressed. Because just as you said, we don't want to send that child who's succeeded back into an environment where they're going to fail. So we can share with you the whole reintegration process.
And I would, because I'm seeing a recidivism rate that's alarming. And I think you are too, when you think about it.
You see it.
Yeah.
You definitely see it.
Right.
I think our numbers show that overall, most of the youth who exit out aren't coming back, but there is that population that.
Right. Are we tracking them in adult facilities?
It's my understanding.
The ability to do that. Yeah.
Yes, it's my understanding that they
Because
are
I would
doing
love
the track.
to see those numbers too. Okay. Because we're letting them out at 16, 17. The next crime they commit is usually, in an adult facility. And that's been my concern. And I know I've said a mouthful, but I think if we're going to address it, we have to take the holistic approach, or we end up back here 5 years from now having the same conversations. And how we take that holistic approach, I don't know, but I look for you for answers
Yes, ma'am.
to that.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Senator Jackson. And we have some of our fine attorneys who are in the room taking notes and making sure that that information is being recorded and will be actually a part of the process, making sure that as we move forward in this whole process that is included, and making sure that as we get ready to do legislation, if necessary, that is also a part of it, and waiting to also receive information back from you all. Probably, I haven't set the meeting for our next meeting, but I don't know if it'll be in January or February.
Okay.
But by that time, we certainly would like to have that information, if possible, before, so that we can talk about it once you guys get here.
Yes, ma'am.
And
Okay.
we definitely will be able to give updates on the WARE investigation. We are working with the Inspector General's office. We've shared the contracts we've had, and pretty much I sat down and had a conversation about our findings. And so we hope to be able to give you an update as well.
Okay, thank you.
And
Proceed.
Yes, ma'am. And so we have opened up the West Feliciana facility, which is on the Angola State Penitentiary grounds, and that is a Tier 1 facility. And so we can house up to 24 youth. Currently, we only have, I think we're down to 7, but quite honestly, we may be down to 5. So unfortunately, with some of these youth, especially the older youth, if they continue to commit criminal acts while they're in our custody, that is now an adult crime. And so I do know we had an incident yesterday, and so 2 of the 18-year-olds are being removed, and they will be housed in the local adult jail, and they're going to be prosecuted as adults. That's what we recognize happens with the Tier 1 youth, the more high-risk youth. And so we are able currently to house 8 youth. We're hiring additional staff so we can go to phase 2, because that facility can hold up to 24 youth total. Going back up north, so we're coming to Swanson, and so at the Swanson campus, Senator Jackson, you were talking about the mental health needs. So Swanson is the campus where we have a mental health wing for those youth who have more severe mental health diagnosis. In addition, we have an intensive mental health treatment program at Swanson that can work with 48 youth. Swanson Monroe currently is a Tier 1, Tier 2 facility, but we are in the process of completing construction on the new Swanson campus, and that's what Senator Jackson spoke of, those single room. That's going to be a game changer for the state of Louisiana. Even with some of the youth that have cycled through the West Feliciana Angola site, what the young people have told us is that, well, I do feel that I can sleep at night. And so we do believe that that's going to provide a high security level facility, and we anticipate that campus opening up sometime in the fall of 2023. So going to what have we done for safety? And so one of the things we've done is on all of our campuses, we have installed, it's called the Valen system.
Before you go
Yes,
any
ma'am.
further, Senator Jackson has a question.
Yes, ma'am.
You know, we come around to Swanson, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so Swanson is in a residential neighborhood. We had a lot of escapes. That facility is not set to open until fall
Next year.
Yes, ma'am.
next
Next year.
So are we continuing the contracts with probation officers?
Yes,
I'm
ma'am.
hearing they're going to be pulling out, but I want to make sure, because I'm hearing that the probation officers cannot continue at the capacity they are, working 12-hour shifts with us, and then going back and working their jobs. So how are we leveling that out? Because I understand that there's a lot of burnout at our facility in Monroe.
Yes, ma'am. So, Senator Jackson, now that we have the Angola site, that gives us an extra resource to remove those youth who we know could potentially engage in either that violent behavior on staff, peers, or escape. So we are in conversation with Secretary LeBlanc. We still have the adult probation and parole and DOC staff at Swanson. The agreement is that they will continue to stay as we build our staffing numbers up at Swanson. And in fact, Senator, I think we're going to have a big job fair November 29th.
Because nobody wants to come to Swanson and work. You know, I'm always
Yes, ma'am.
straightforward about it.
Yes, ma'am.
You know, the population where we live is Swanson is not just one of those run-to jobs.
Yes, ma'am.
And then what's still the starting pay at Swanson?
So at this point, as a JJS1, so that's the juvenile specialist 1, the starting pay is $37,000, but we went in and did some pay enhancement, and so we've shortened the period that individual will be on probation. So in 6 months, they can go from 37 up to 40,000, and in 18 months, they can actually be at 45,000, and that is a position that does not require a college degree. And so we did that pay incentive to actually try to attract more staff.
Right.
I do want to let you know about data, because Mr. Patin and I, we believe in data. So we kept hearing that, oh, you can't hire, you don't have enough people, nobody wants to come and work. Well, we actually went and pulled some data, and what we found is that we've had a lot of people apply to work for OJJ. And in particular, we actually found the numbers were good for Swanson. And so what we're working on internally is that we want to improve our onboarding process. So from the time somebody says, I want to work with you, being able to quickly get them onboarded to be able to come and work with us.
So are they passing all of your clearance to work?
Yes, ma'am.
Are we just waiting too long and they find another job? What?
In my opinion, that's what I see from the data, that for some of these individuals who are saying, I'm ready to work today, if you wait 30 days to get back with them, they have likely found another job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how long does it take to do all of your assessments?
I think the complete assessment process is about 7 days.
Yeah.
When you consider drug screens, criminal background checks, TB test, psychologicals, this is about a 7-day process.
7-day process.
So since we left last time, I mean, we realized we got to do something about in hiring more staff. And so we've been working with the commissioner's office. And so we're in the process of creating our own HR department. We found that was a missing piece, and so we'll have an HR director now, 2 HR managers, and several HR specialists. And I feel pretty confident that's going to help speed up the ability to onboard a new hiree.
But we're guaranteed right now that probation and parole will stay on board until you're fully staffed at Swanson.
That is a guarantee. And so every week we are having conversation, looking at numbers. We have not decreased the presence of adult P&P at the Swanson campus because we know that's a larger campus. And so, yes, ma'am.
And I know this is going to be controversial. But I'm going to ask it. Adult P&P now can have mace on our juvenile campus, right?
They do carry mace, yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
what about our employees?
So we have done some training on the use of chemical agents. Of course, we want to make sure that's being used on a very rare and limited basis. However, we do have staff that's undergoing that training to know how to properly use it and when to use it. Now, I want to make it clear, we still believe in Lamont. We believe in doing de-escalation processes, and chemical agents should only be used if it's a matter of somebody's going to get hurt or you are going to hurt yours.
No, I understand that the presence of a chemical agent is usually to deter behavior.
Yes, ma'am.
The hope is that we deter behavior and never have to use it.
Yes, ma'am.
But if it's been an effective deterrence for those who are adult P&P, it just, kind of I question whether or not it would be a good deterrence when we pull them out. And that's, my concern and how we approaching that. We don't want anyone maced, but if it's been a great deterrence, we've seen to have very little escapes since the adult P&P have been on campus. And so maybe the question about the mace was very forward, but what else is it that's deterring, this behavior that we were seeing weekly in Swanson?
So I think it's a combination of, like you said, chemical spray as a deterrent, but also just physical presence. When you increase the number of staff that's on the campus with these rovers who are the probation and parole officers, we've increased the numbers where when an incident is occurring, we have 4 to 5 staff members that are walking into the room saying, what's going on? Well, the kids realize now it's 1 to 7 instead of 1 to 2. So it's a different scenario, and the youth become more compliant, quite frankly.
Right.
So I think that there is definitely a combination, and with our increased staffing, we will be doing increased training with creating our own, in a sense, probation and parole rover teams. It'll be JJS rover teams, but they would be serving that same purpose.
And also recognizing that Swanson will be the new Tier 1 facility. We are in the process of putting together a TAC team. And so that will be a part of that staff level up there that should an event occur, that we have specially trained staff who will be able to go in and tactically work with the youth to de-escalate them.
And I think even beyond that, when you can put in all kind of devices, you can put in all kind of folks, but you have to put in the right type of folks. One of the things that has been implemented, and it's further down in our report, and I'm kind of skipping ahead a little bit, but we're implementing trust-based relationship training with all of our staff. We're utilizing ACEs, so that way we can figure out what are those traumatic events that are going on, so that way we can really build the relationship, find out what's going on, so that way when I walk into the room, young man looks at me and says, "You're a friend. I can come to the side and talk to you about what's going on and de-escalate without having to get physically involved with that youth." So
like
it's all just pieces to the puzzle.
I get it. So like at Swanson, mental health treatment, how many employees do we have at Swanson that provide mental health treatment?
So we do have a doctor at Swanson. So he's employed with OJJ, and so he's on the site. We do have our social workers, case workers who work on the Swanson campus. And so then you also have your JJS staff, but they have also been trained on working with that population of youth. Yes, ma'am.
And you know why I'm asking. We welcome Bridge City, and I don't want them to have to go there and go lift. They don't have to. And so, we welcome a number of Bridge City youth to the Swanson facility. I think it was the right thing to do. It's controversial in my area, but the truth is youth have to be housed and treated somewhere.
Yes, ma'am.
The housed is one thing, the treated is where I'm gearing toward now.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for all your work.
Thank you.
The last thing I would just say on the security side, because I do think this was really huge for our agency. So on every campus, we have a surveillance system around the fence line. It's called a balance system. And so that now enables my staff to detect if somebody's around the fence line, and staff has been trained on how to work that system, and we believe it is helping us. As I kind of wrap up, just giving you some updates on education, where we are education on our campuses. So since we were here back in July with the letter, we have had 15 youth actually obtain their high school diploma. We've had 6 youth obtain their high set or complete the high set. We do have the implementation of Jobs for America graduates on our campus. We are now coming out of the pandemic. We're still doing the virtual graduations, and we may actually keep that. So for those parents who cannot travel, or family members who can't travel to the graduations on our campus, being able to allow them to participate virtually is something we want to keep in place. Implementation of the Department of Education's Jumpstart Graduation Pathway and Career Technical Programs. Also implementation of the Electronic Discipline Reporting System to assist with identifying behavior trends on our campuses. Vocational skills is something that we believe is important for those youth who may not choose to go to college. And so we are partnered with the Bossier Community College, Fletcher Community College, and we have a future partnership with Louisiana Technical College in Alexandria, because we want to have a full complement of educational services to our youth. Something that Deputy Secretary Summers did first when he got there was he brought in a new head of our education department, as well as a special educational teacher. We do believe that we are seeing some positive results of this focus on the education. And so one of our campuses actually was able to go from an F rating up to a C rating. And what I always try to emphasize to the public is the children who come to us, as we all know, they have all forms of trauma, all forms of abuse that they are trying to overcome, and we're putting them in a classroom setting and putting the expectation that they are learning. I believe that the things we're doing on our campuses is starting to show those positive results. So we're very proud of the fact that the Riverside School, which is at Bridge City, again, went from an F rating up to a C rating. The Southside Swanson campus, we are very close to also being at a higher rating. And so we believe that these are improvements that we're making on our campus. I know that there was an education report put out by the Louisiana Center for Children's Rights. And so we are working in partnership with that center. I don't dispute some of the findings in that report, and we're working collaboratively to make sure that we as a agency can make sure our children are having all their educational needs met. So in closing, what I would say, Senator Barrow, when we were before you in July, yes, we were looking at the Jetson grounds as a possible placement for youth. We have moved away from that, so that proposal of opening the winter wing, with the opening of Angola, those youth were able to be transferred to that site. We did make those improvements to the winter wing, and so I know you had some questions about that. We spent probably right a little bit under $1 million to refurbish the winter wing, and currently the plan would be, Senator, that only if we had to do some type of emergency evacuation, at least we have a refurbished building that we could move children safely to. But there are no plans to occupy that space right now, Senator.
Okay.
And I know that was one of the questions you had.
Yes, and then the other part of the questions were regarding the financial cost to make the adjustments that you guys made. And so, as I look at the budget, I'm gonna get to you, Senator Mizell, from for this year, it was roughly $160 million, right? How much have you guys actually exceeded that budget in any way in making these adjustments, moving to Angola, etc.?
We have not exceeded that 160 million. We did have some money that we were able to utilize for repairs and improvements, and so we've been kind of shifting dollars to do the Angola site. That was right at 550,000 to be able to go in there, renovate the building, put some security measures. So we have cameras throughout the building. We wanted to make sure the building was less punitive and more rehabilitative. And so we have 3 classrooms in that building now. We have space for healthcare services, medical services, counseling and treatment. And so Ms. Zapatan played a big role in helping us with going into the building and identifying what we needed to do to bring it up to our scale. But Senator, that came out to right at 600,000.
Okay, so that was not a big chunk of money.
No, ma'am.
Have y'all had to make any other investments, maybe at Swanson or any of the other facilities, as we are waiting for them to come online, or the new building to come online?
Swanson is, because we have the new building that we're building out there, that's where a lot of our dollars are going. The others are just typical repairs that we would have to
Okay,
make.
yeah. Okay, so let me ask you a couple of questions regarding the budget. So as I look here at the budget, and they have it divided out of North region, Central, Southwest region, and Southeast region. I want you to tell me which facility is in each region. One of the things that really caught my attention is the fact that in 22 budget, you guys have more employees that you actually requested, and then in 23 you have less for every region. And I would like to know the rationale behind that, as we know how great the need is, and how many employees do you actually have hired. And I don't know if you have that information offhand, but if not, I'd like to have that information.
I can get you, because I want to get you an exact number, because I will definitely say we have a lot of unfilled positions. And so we're utilizing some of those positions to create a HR department. But when it comes to the frontline staff,
How many?
to fill the HR department,
Yes.
Senator, that's only like maybe 10
10?
positions. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Because I see that one thing that I noticed is that in administration, you had 45 that you had requested last year, but this year you had 48. That was the only place where there was actually extra or additional requests, but for everything else, it was less. So tell me this: what facilities fall within the northern region?
So that's going to be the Swanson Monroe facility and also the Swanson Columbia facility.
Okay. Tell me Central, Southwest.
So Central is going to be Acadiana Bunkie, and then we also have the Acadiana St. Martinville facility.
Okay. And then Southeast.
And so Southeast, you have the West Feliciana, which is on the grounds of Angola, as well as the Bridge City campus down in Jefferson. And that is a good point. At the time of this budget, West Feliciana, Angola was not in the picture. So we definitely will have a need for more positions, because that wasn't originally factored in our budget.
So as you guys are preparing the budget for the governor, that's due in November, right?
Yes, ma'am.
If it's due, so you guys have to submit that by the end of the month.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And at this point, do you know what the ask is now for the budget for the upcoming year?
My undersecretary is not with me, so I
Okay.
can definitely get that information to you, ma'am.
Okay. Yes, I like to have that information as well, so I can look at that comparatively. As it relates to the work that you guys do in the when you actually are integrating the families back to their family, when you're integrating the children back to their families, what other agencies do you guys work with?
So a lot of times we will tap into wraparound providers. And so we definitely partner with LDH for those services. I have probation and parole staff, and so of course the youth will have a probationary or parole staffer that will work with them. And we really start tapping into the community resources to support the family.
Which could mean what? I mean, just
House.
agencies that. So, because I'm looking at the contract services amount, which actually went up as well, is 39 million, and I would like to know some of the contracts that you guys actually have and with whom.
Yes, ma'am. I can get you that information.
Okay. Okay. Oh, Senator Mizell, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's right. On a different track.
Yes, ma'am.
I really appreciate the information about the education, and I mean, I just see this. You know, if we look at it from a different way, we have a tremendous opportunity to change the track that these kids are on.
Yep.
And when you said 15 youth have obtained a high school diploma, what's the time frame that those 15 youth? What time period are you talking about?
So these are likely older youth who have been with us, and so those achievements they probably were with us, say, 18 months, and within that period they were able to continue to work their schooling to either graduate or get the high set.
So they start and finish within your oversight.
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
So
ma'am.
what happens when a young person is there, and maybe they'll get started and they leave? Is there a process that follows through on that and gives it the?
Yep.
Tell me about that.
And that was the report that the Center for Children's Rights issued, that where I feel we can make some improvement is reintegrating that youth back to their home school and making sure that they're not behind when they return back.
It's a huge hurdle that you're talking about.
But I
because,
think it's one we
they're
gotta
not likely
achieve.
to have been in school. Are most of these kids currently in school before they go right to? I would think that they would have been on a truancy list, whatever that means. I mean,
I would say what we tend to see, Senator Mizell, is that the average youth that's placed in our custody, they're probably 2 grades behind academically. And so it is a challenge because you're trying to catch them up to where they need to be. And then, as you said, now we're integrating you back to the community. I honestly do feel, and I think we have the right team in place on the education side now, making sure that when that child goes back home, they can just keep going and they're not missing. What I find sometimes is that there may be a delay in records. So we're trying to transfer our records to the local school district to make sure that credits are being accepted. And that's an area where I think we can improve. And so you asked about partners. So
Yes,
Department
I
of
just wanted to
Education.
bring up
Yes, ma'am.
yes. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Department of Education.
well,
That's a
I mean,
partner.
I mean, Senator Jackson and I both are on education committee.
Yes.
This is a game changer for life to me,
Yes.
if we can do that. Because when a kid has a diploma and can get a job,
Yep.
you're changing the direction altogether. But we can't make it where I'm naive, and I don't even think a kid that's gone through what these kids have gone through are going to walk into a high school and just walk in like it's another day. That's not that we can't. I just don't see that happening.
And some of the conversation that my staff has with the youth is because you will identify that.
Right.
You probably have a better chance with us to at least get that high set or diploma. So let's really focus on that. And so we do have those conversations, but we have a lot of children that will come in and say, no, I'm only here for a short period of time. I want to graduate. So just keep me where I am. So when I go home, I'm not going to be behind.
But can't we incentivize them? And
Yes,
I mean,
ma'am.
there's ways that we put a greater value on the long term than
Yes, ma'am.
And Anyway,
There-
I'd like to continue this conversation
Yes, ma'am.
on that. Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you, Madam Pro Tem. I would like to say thank you to you and Mr. Curtis and Mr. Patan for your work, and to the Secretary in his absence. Certainly, I do believe that you guys have the right heart for this job and that you're committed to it. The thing that I guess makes me very sad is that some of these children, they start off behind the 8 ball. They are born into situations that they did not ask for, could not control. And I think Senator Jackson gave a great illustration about the young man who started off. I mean, his start was very wrong, and it was very tough. It could be very tough for him to come out of that situation. But you guys become, to me, the stopgate that can actually change their entire life, giving them some sense of hope, because many of these young people have lost hope. They don't see no way out. And the folks that they depended on and was supposed to be able to trust have let them down. And so I want to thank you for what you're doing, but I tell you, we still have a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
Again, Senator Jackson brought up a lot of issues. She and Senator Mizell, especially from the article that came forth in terms of some internal things that you guys can actually do, but then there are going to be some things that we need to do as well. And so I'm expecting that. So again, I would like to know about the budgetary issues.
Ma'am.
And the report that you guys will be submitting to the governor for the budget. If I can have that prior to, I would like to really have that before you submit it.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thank y'all so very much. Are there any other comments?
Oh, no, ma'am. Thank you.
Ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you so very much.